So welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. My co-host today is Patryk Mrozek. Patryk, thanks for being here.
Hi, Randy.
So I can see that our Padlet is starting to fill up, and I would like to invite people to just listen to a question and raise your hand if you'd like to say something in response. We have some distinguished guests who were invited today: Marla, Yoshida, Donna, Brenton, all of J. Dean Elvin, who is our former top coordinator. If you've got a quick response or a long response to any one of these questions, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you and bring you into the conversation. So here's a question with a lot of upvotes. How do you motivate students for the long haul? Donna Brenton, you're unmuted now. What do you think about this question?
Thanks, Randy.
Say about motivation. How do we motivate our students in pronunciation courses?
I think pronunciation teaching can be very intimidating for a lot of students. And I think the more we can create a nurturing classroom atmosphere, that's a really important thing. I'm a big believer in choral activities because students can kind of lose themselves in a choral drill and feel a lot freer. I'm also a big believer in group work in pronunciation teaching because, again, in a smaller group, students are much more willing to work and the teacher can kind of circulate, assuming it's a live classroom, but even if it's not, go from Zoom room to Zoom room, breakout room. So I think that can help a lot. I just wrote an article with some Australian pronunciation colleagues that's going to come out in a volume that John Levis and Tracy Derwing and Sinem Sunsat Hagelheimer are doing for Routledge. And it's called Beyond Controlled, Guided, and Free. And it's very influenced by my Australian colleagues who are haptic pronunciation practitioners, big believers in sort of the psychological aspects of pronunciation teaching. And it's looking at the need to go beyond just the idea of moving from controlled to guided to free practice to look at, how it's affecting students and getting them to do things like journaling about pronunciation teaching. So I don't want to dominate here. I'm sure others have ideas, but those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah,
I'm going to mute myself now, Randy, so that you can't just call on me randomly.
Before you do that, Donna, I have a follow-up question to your response. But first, let me just say I really like that idea of making pronunciation classes less intimidating, because that's certainly a way to get motivated. My follow-up to that is you mentioned something called haptic pronunciation teaching, and I've heard that word in other contexts before, but what do you mean in this context?
Well, the haptic pronunciation movement very closely related to a lot of the stuff that Marsha talks about, whole body pronunciation teaching, using the body itself to sort of help students overcome the first language barriers that they have to pronunciation. And they have all sorts of really interesting techniques, like something called Fight Club, where when they're teaching stress, the students do sort of a mime of a boxing match, and they do things like raise their fists up and face a partner and do, pronunciation. They've got another one called the butterfly technique. If you're interested, all you need to do, all of you, is just Google haptic pronunciation teaching. Bill Acton is a name that's very associated with that. The two colleagues that I have been working with, Mike Burry and Amanda Baker, Brian Tiemann in Japan, these are all people who are sort of at the forefront of haptic pronunciation teaching.
Okay. The idea of Fight Club is permanently burned into my brain now. Although the butterfly technique sounds like the perfect antidote for the Fight Club.
Right, right.
One thing that, and Donna, thank you for that. You can go ahead and put yourself on mute, since I noticed you were ready to do that. Something that you didn't mention, or that Donna didn't mention, is when you motivate students for the long haul, it really helps if they know what kind of progress they're making. And we haven't really addressed that. I wonder if anybody has some experience with how you let students know the progress that they're making. And it can be really harder in a pronunciation course than in other kinds of courses that we teach. I know. Anybody who's got a suggestion about showing students they're progressing?
Randy, I think Seth is raising their hand.
Seth, do you got an answer to that?
Yeah, I think if you compare maybe a recording of the student at the beginning of the course and then another recording that the student provides later in the course. I haven't always done this, but and then if you walk them through it and point out the areas that have improved and maybe why, that could be, I think that could be useful. Then they can really have a feel for what changes they've made and the reasons.
Yeah, to make a recording before and then another recording later on during the course. Mircea Buvesti, do you have a response?
Yeah, I mean, we use over at Saddleback College, we use Burlington English, and they actually have that feature that Seth was mentioning. You have, you listen, you record, and then you listen again. So, you would do it like it mid say at the beginning. It's could be an ongoing, activity, but maybe one good way of doing it is that, doing it like every month, not like in every week, but so there you can really get a sense of the progress, and then kind of getting feedback, from your instructor as to, maybe it's the wrong syllable, maybe, there's a bit of slurring, maybe, so that would help, but having them listen to, the original and then the updated and, improved version.
So it sounds like you mean the student can give their own feedback to themselves, noticing their own improvements rather than waiting for the instructor to give that encouragement or point out that improvement.
Yeah, Burlington English has that, you just, record and then listen. And I think, with time, students actually, develop, the ability to distinguish, the right sound from, maybe a sound that, it's a little bit fuzzy. And then, also what I do is that, let's say when we have a difficult word, just go to Google, hit the, the icon. Okay, this is how you pronounce it. And then go back to your Burlington English. So it's like it's really kind of helping students acquire, that ability to distinguish between sounds, maybe what, I'm not doing correctly, the slurs, or I might be, not pronouncing a final S, or, whatever it is, there, challenges, on many different levels. But I think that eventually, because the better you speak, the better you're going to listen. So they kind of, go together, listening and speaking as, a mutually supportive, components of a language. So yeah, that's kind of, that's kind of what I try to do. And it's working actually pretty well, to be honest with you. So.
Yeah, we really don't want to ignore the importance of students becoming a good listener and being able to make those distinctions. Yeah, thank you. And Michelle, you had your hand up as well.
Yes, thank you. So I teach in a program that's usually we have 7.5 weeks. So it's difficult. What can you teach in 7.5 weeks? But what I like to do for the culminating project at like the end of the the 7th week is I ask the students to think about one thing that they learned that was really difficult for them, and then they do a presentation on it. So it might be like syllable stress, or it might be like a particular vowel sound, like the sound was really hard for me. Or, the TH, the theta. A lot of languages don't have that sound. So they get really excited. And even if they haven't perfected it, they are able to identify what was problematic for them in learning it. And then they present it to the class. And so I think making the students the teacher is a great way for them to be motivated about what they're learning, and also to kind of share their experience as they're learning the different little pieces of pronunciation that help them. And they may not have mastered it by the end of the 7 weeks, but when they teach it to the class, I think it becomes really clear in their mind and really helpful to the other students as well. So that's one thing that I like to do with my students.
Yeah, Michelle, I really like that idea of the students giving a presentation on syllable stress or how to pronounce the TH sounds. Great. I also see that another question getting a lot of upvotes on the Padlet is this one: pronunciation for public speaking. This topic came up when we surveyed top IG members earlier in the year, and now it's getting like 7 upvotes. So who's been teaching a course related to preparing students to do public speaking? If you've got any experience with this, how do you prepare your students in this kind of a course? Let's see. I see Marchea has also got his hand up for this. Go ahead and share what you know.
Well, so for one thing, I've taught a lot of IELTS and TOEFL prep. So you have, the speaking part. I've also worked with nurses who I think part of the requirement besides the nursing boards is to score 7.0 on the IELTS. So I've worked a lot with them. So, you have, delivery pauses, focusing, on your intonation, make sure, you're dropping your voice to let people know you're done. So we just go, I've gone through, mechanics, but primarily what I try to help them with is the flow. And, I always tell everybody, think of music, think of, when you dance, you kind of go with the flow. And it's kind of the same thing, with speech. It's like, try to find the musicality, the flow, and let kind of the words, kind of pull you along. Okay, you got to stop, just like in dance, you pause for a second. So it's kind of getting an internal rhythm. I think that's what I'm getting at, is helping them, develop an internal rhythm. As a quick example, yes, no questions, right? The yes, no questions, you end up, it's a rising intonation. I just say, how would you ask this question in your native language? Oh, see, you're going up, right? So it's no different in English. So kind of also, draw on what, your native language can bring to this conversation, and, build that, flow and, kind of confident stuff.
Yeah, I like the idea of flow. And of course, a public speaking situation is a time where an audience has a much lower tolerance for disfluencies, but it's also a time when students can become a lot more distracted by the various demands of a public speaking task. So they have, even less cognitive bandwidth to devote to monitoring their pronunciation and making those pronunciation adjustments that they've been learning and practicing so hard. But keeping everything flowing might be the number one technique that audiences are most likely to notice. Jay Dean, you've also got a hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, so I'm not currently teaching pronunciation in a course, but I am training teachers to be teaching and doing public speaking and things like that. And so you mentioned just briefly that sometimes, public speaking or having to give a presentation can be quite daunting or a little bit scary. So something that we've started to do with our teachers is start them with a book. So we call it Read Like a Teacher. So we have them actually practice reading aloud and using different vocal techniques so that they can be heard and understood. We do try and frame and go, okay, well, let's think about how we might do this if we're working with children so that they can understand. And some of the key things that we do in our read aloud workshops is we look at some vocal techniques. So we start with pitch and rate and have them practice with that. So we might come up with a sentence or two to practice with that. So for example, stop, put down the spatula, and we'll have them practice, you know, that really high, really low, fast and slow. And then we add in other techniques such as your volume and energy, because we talk about, you know, public speaking is about bringing energy to a talk to be engaging. And so we have them practice with a sentence to help them with that. So for example, we have, I'm so excited to learn about reading, and we have them say it out loud, listen to each other. You can do it online and just have them mute themselves as well and practice, and just have them listen to, how do I sound if, you know, I'm saying it with low volume or low energy versus high energy, and help them to kind of find a balance in that. We also look at your emphasis and your stress shifting. So she didn't steal my wallet, and have them think about how that would change with the different words, and then finish up with pace as well, and have them look at, you know, what are some of those markers that you can use. So that's something that I found. And then we actually then, once we've gone through that, we move into a book and we look at that and think, okay, what are some moments where we could raise our voice there? What are some moments we could bring some energy in? And that's just something, yeah, that we found our students like, that you might find with your students, that starting with a book rather than having to give a presentation might be a little bit less intimidating.
Yeah, thanks, Jadine. I like that idea. And in my work at UCSB, we don't train teachers per se, but we train teaching assistants. And I also have done something similar where I ask students to read a passage out loud in addition to giving presentations that they've prepared. And the reading of texts that were written to be on a page is quite a bit different, I would say, than producing something extemporaneously that sounds a lot more like oral English. But it does give us a chance to talk about pauses and where to put those pauses and other kinds of inflection. But you know, JD, what I haven't tried, and I really like this idea now, is just how to add excitement and say, I'm really excited to be talking about this. That's something I think would kind of push my students to a higher plateau. So thanks for that idea. Marla, you had a hand up as well, please.
Although I think Patrick had his hand up before mine. Did you,
Oh, that's
Patrick?
okay. That's
Yeah?
okay. Go ahead,
Yeah?
Marla. I can wait
Okay.
until the end.
Okay, I just wanted to suggest shadowing, because if you find a video of somebody giving a presentation or a speech, and it's somebody that you want to sound like that person, well, to some extent at least. And if you listen again and again and try to repeat it after them or with them, you can kind of build on their intonation and their pauses, and also the segmental aspects. That never hurts. So I think that's a great way to practice.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that, Marla? Because I haven't used shadowing per se, but I have sometimes started a course by asking students, is there a speaker of English, like a celebrity or a movie star whose voice you particularly admire? But I want to know, Marla, you know, when you do shadowing, how do students identify somebody that they want to sound like?
If it's each individual person choosing their person, they're on their own. I mean, they might remember somebody from a movie or somebody from, you know, even a politician possibly. So that's up to them to think about the voices that they've heard and to choose somebody. If I'm choosing a short bit to use for shadowing practice in the classroom, I just try to choose something that's clear, easy to understand, standard, and their choice might not be, standard American English or RP or whatever. Maybe they want to sound like they're from a particular location. And if they do, hey, that's fine with me. But yeah, so I would leave it up to them, because I don't know how they want to sound. They know how they want to sound.
Mhm. Yeah, and even a politician, as you said, I'm sure I'm dating myself, but I remember back in 2008, a lot of students were very excited about the inauguration speech by Barack Obama, and everybody was
Right.
reading that speech and studying it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's certainly probably a contemporary version of that politician that students can get really excited about.
Yeah.
Let's see. And Donna, even if Patryk had his hand up for longer, I want to try to bring in the distinguished guests that we invited. So let's hear from you first.
Okay, well, that's a good thing, because I want to just sort of reinforce what Marla just said about the shadowing or mirroring. And I'm about to go to TESOL on Monday and do a pre-convention institute with a number of pronunciation specialists, one of whom is Colleen Myers, and she's done a lot of work on this. And her contribution to the pre-convention institute is talking all about how she uses shadowing with ITAs and professionals who are not native speakers of English. And they do, Marla, what you were suggesting. They find a TED Talk by someone that they admire, but who is not a native speaker of English, someone who's achieved a really high level of intelligibility, and they pick a very short segment of that TED Talk. They transcribe it, and then they make notations about the body movements and other things that the speaker does to sort of reinforce the importance of aspects of what he or she's talking about. They do a first version, and then they get feedback from Colleen, and then they do a second version. And she shows clips of these in our Pre-Convention Institute. It's so powerful. I've never done this myself, so I'm just sort of reporting on what it is she does, but I think it's a really, really important thing. And again, she leaves it totally up to the students to identify who it is they want to sound like. And very often it's someone from their native language background, so that they can say, I want to be a really advanced level speaker, Thai speaker of English, and here's somebody whose accent and progress in achieving, high levels of intelligibility I really admire.
Yeah, I love that idea of students being able to emulate a voice that has the accent of where you're from. And students tend to take a lot of pride in the places that they come from, but they also want to sound like a expert, accomplished speaker of English who's from that place. Patryk, what about your response?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Randy. Well, I wanted to second and then third Marla and Anna speaking about shadowing. I'm probably the shadowing person in the room. I absolutely love the technique. And I've also found that doing regularly helps with long-term motivation. I work with students from the video game industry who have to do regular presentations at work internally. And what we do is we often shadow videos that they would watch anyway because they're interested in the content. So they're motivated to learn whatever the video game industry sort of celebrities have to say, or pundits have to say about their favorite game design, and they at the same time they work with me on transcribing things and marking their transcripts and then shadowing and imitating the speakers. So it really works for motivation as well. I've had students who've been with me for 5-6 years and pretty much the only thing that we do is shadowing. And they're, reaching really high levels of pronunciation at this point. Another point I wanted to make is that just like writing, public speaking is a skill that even native speakers need to learn and might struggle with. So we're not only limited to resources that have been specifically designed for English language learners. So in my courses, I draw from textbooks and videos and materials that have actually been designed for native speakers to improve their pacing and their pausing and how impactful their public speaking is. And I wanted to put a link in the chat to an app called Speako, which I really like because it's a public speaking coach designed not just for English as a second language or foreign language learners, but for anyone who wants to improve their delivery. And the app uses voice recognition software to coach students on their pacing, rhythm, pausing, intonation, especially that final intonation that we want to go down for extra impact. So those are my two cents.
Yeah, great. And did you say, Patryk, that you have some students that you've been with for 5 or 6 months?
Oh, I said years.
5 or 6 years. Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't quite catch that. That's pretty remarkable. Video game industry sounds like a really niche area of pronunciation teaching. So great to have your toehold in there. I want to also call on Joseph, who's got his hand up. Joseph, what have you got to say?
So I'm teaching English public speaking for competitions at my college in Jinhua in China. And what we do with the students is I will listen to the top 100 student presenters at a conference or a competition. And I transcribe what they're saying. And then I have the students listen to it, read over it, look at the prompt. And we look at it together for where do they pause and which section does what. And we try to see how this person delivers it. Sometimes we'll have the students say the same presentation where they can read through it and practice what they are saying, the top presenters are saying. And then we have them also write their own presentations for the same prompt or a similar prompt. So we try to break down what they can see so then we can start using it. But they're in charge of what is important or what do they think is important. So then they can start using it in their own presentations.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. At my campus, UCSB, we have something like a competition for graduate students called the Grad Slam, and I believe it's UC-wide. My colleague Jeffrey Hansen is here, and you've done some work with the Grad Slam contestants. Have you ever used, this question is for you, Jeff, have you ever used the Grad Slam videos to work with your multilingual students or your international TAs?
Yeah, Randy, am I unmuted?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, yeah, sure, I have, always, Randy. I've done the training for the Grad Slam competitions for not the last couple of years once COVID kicked in, but all for probably about 6 or 7 years before that. And it's a big deal on our campus. As a matter of fact, it just finished last week, but we have about $16,000 we give away in prizes. We've had international grads that I've worked with actually participate, and they've done pretty well too. One of them actually won it maybe 3 years back. So yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to just add one other thing, and I'll let the experts here continue, but I teach primarily native speakers in our writing program on campus, undergrad and grad. But I do teach about a third time in the EMS program, the English for Multilingual Students program with Randy. And we've worked together for, I don't know, Randy, what, 25 years? Long time. But I just wanted to add one thing. I don't typically, unless I'm teaching a pronunciation part of a course for our international students, where we'll actually work on particular pronunciation issues like linking and things like that, I don't call it pronunciation. I usually call everything compensation skills. And I have 8 skills that I teach that my undergrads and grads have to show me that they can improve significantly within 1 quarter. And these compensation skills are designed to improve their basic comprehensibility quickly within a 10-week quarter so that they can be certified to teach as a TA, or as an undergrad, they can, present in their other classes and be understood. But my point is, I really focus on things like overall pacing, smoother pace, even if they have to slow down, more careful enunciation, or as I call it, articulation, where they're saying all of the necessary syllables, word endings, things like that. Speaking loudly enough. We had an international student just in my undergrad course, her first big presentation, people couldn't hear her. So we had a chat, speak louder. The next presentation, she was so much better because she spoke loudly, she sounded confident. But my point is, I end up calling all of these things we're doing compensation skills to compensate for the fact that these students are not native speakers and they're weaker, pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, things like that. So we're compensating by doing these other speaking skills as good as, or maybe better than, native speakers. They seem to get that. They like that they're not feeling like they're trying to make up, improve something that's going to take them years and they're not going to notice progress. And the big thing is that they can really hear the difference within just a matter of a month or 2. So that's my primary thrust in the courses that I teach.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And really hearing the difference brings us back to that original topic of motivation. But I want to say one more thing on this idea of competition speech, which Joseph alluded to, and I posted a link in the chat. The finalists and the winners of the UC Grad Slam competition are publicly available on video, and you can get those videos at that link. It's a competition every year where PhD students and master's degree students in all different disciplines pitch a really brief presentation on their discipline or one exciting thing about their research. And, those very short format presentations, I think, give our ESL students nice place to start with that 5-minute presentation. It seems like something doable to a first-time presenter.
Randy, let me just add, we also have an undergrad slam competition too. I don't know if it's happening this year, but we've had it for the last 5 or 6 years. So we're not just doing it for grad slam. And all of these competitions share the same 3-minute deadline for a presentation. That's it. I think that has worked really well. Just the fact that they only have to speak for 3 minutes and they've got to make those 3 minutes clear. I like the fact that they don't have a lot of time just so that they can kind of speak in circles and that sort of thing.
Great. I don't have a link for that undergrad slam, but if
I'll take a look here.
If you have it, give it a
Yeah, let me
share.
find it. I'll post it in a minute.
Let me shift over to Michelle, who's had her hand up. Go ahead.
I just wanted to echo what Marla and Donna had brought up about the shadowing, and we always called it mirroring. And touching back on the motivation, my students would choose like a clip from YouTube. And the time that a few years back when Game of Thrones was out, all the students were watching Game of Thrones and they all wanted to imitate Tyrion the dwarf's speech to his father. And so, these are just short 3-minute clips. And we really look at, yes, the intonation and the pitch and the body movements and everything. And the students love that. And, if they didn't want to do that, Martin Luther King's speeches are always really popular. Obama's speeches were very popular. And sometimes I had students who wanted to do a song like from their favorite hip hop artist. And so that added in a whole other element of like rhythm. So I think these are all great things that we can do using the mirroring and shadowing, as you said. And it touches on the learner motivation to, be really energized about imitating the person that they really admire.
Yeah, that's fantastic to use students as the source of materials that they want to use for their own shadowing or mirroring, because for my own part, I never would have known to use Tyrion the Dwarf as teaching material. But, when you bring the other students in, they bring in what they know, and that certainly improves their motivation. I don't know about Tyrion the Dwarf, but that must have been really some speech. I'll have to go look it up. I'm also looking at Seth, Seth, you've got your hand up, although your camera is off, but if you're able to unmute and say your question, go ahead.
Oh, hello. Yes, thanks. So I think, especially with respect to public speaking and oral presentation, I think sometimes in our profession, sometimes we might unconsciously assume that students can simply transfer those skills from their experience, their L1 experience, articulation, enunciation, projection, and so on, and just reformulate it for the target language. And yet I think we have to realize that they don't necessarily grow up with public speaking in their school systems. We can't assume that people do that in the United States either, but I think many of us come from backgrounds where, we did speeches in elementary school, middle school, through college, university. And I've realized that I've had to teach certain techniques, very basic techniques that some of the students had never encountered before. I guess I thought of that when I don't, was it Jeffrey maybe who said, who had the quiet student who needed to improve their volume? I thought of it when
I think that was Jeff Hansen.
Yeah. I thought that's when it mentioned, because I've had, I've encountered students who just they've never experienced that. Never experienced anyone giving them any feedback or guidance about anything related to public speaking. And anyway, yeah, so I think sometimes we assume they have some experience that they can simply transfer to L2, and they might not have that experience at all.
Yeah, that's great. I would like to transition at this time to a question on the Padlet, which currently has more upvotes than any other question. And it's this one. Do you have a favorite resource? It could be a textbook, it could be an app that you recommend in an online course. Anybody have a favorite app or a favorite textbook to recommend? This has been also the topic of recent top IG events, but we can briefly go around if anybody has one. Danny, what have you got?
Hi, everyone. My name is Danny. I work with Randy and Jeff at EMS at UCSB. You can hear me. Thanks for putting this on. And thanks, Marsha, also for being here. I just wanted to suggest a couple. I taught in the Middle East and East Asia, teaching pronunciation and business English and all sorts of topics. But one that I learned about was through my studies at American University under Dr. Robin Barr, who's a fantastic practitioner in pronunciation. And she puts on a spring retreat every year, I believe, at American University, focusing directly on pronunciation. It has really practical materials and gives everyone a PDF of all the forms they can do. But we also learned how to use targeting pronunciation by Sue Miller. So it's a really good textbook. Michael Swan's Learner English is available, I believe, even online. Anyone can just look it up, and that gives you all the segmental issues, the IPA that certain languages, L1s have trouble with when they're learning English. So I would suggest that one. And color vowel chart, I don't know if everyone knows about that one, but that's a good one to learn about, for having students learn about the English vowels in a more active visual way. I don't know if it will help on the online class if it's only an online, but those are some I wanted to put out there. And lastly, I just wanted to mention before I forget is our approach to teaching pronunciation and how it should be more about accent addition rather than accent reduction. because some students, really think having this accent is like such a barrier to learning English, but they're speaking fine. And, they're more non-native speakers in English than native speakers of English. So I think that's important for us to really reiterate with our students to build that motivation and that intrinsic motivation for them. So I just want to put my 2 cents on that one.
Yeah, thanks. Donna, what about you?
Well, Danny sort of covered some of the stuff that I wanted to talk about. He mentioned Learner English. I just want everybody to take a look. If you don't have a copy of Learner English and you do have multicultural students in your classroom, it's a really important resource. Another one that I use all the time, and this is primarily segmental practice, but that is the tried and true pronunciation contrasts in English, Nilsson and Nilsson. You can see my copy is pretty well thumbed. I use this for creating activities a lot because it has lots of words with particular vowel sounds or particular consonant sounds, and so creating drills. I love Rita Wong. Again, this is a real old version, but she has a lot of very innovative ideas, and it's simply called Teaching Pronunciation. Not available anymore, but I'm sure if you visit a used book site, you can, come up with some, find some copies there. If you're on LinkedIn, check out Robin Walker and check out Mark Hancock, and they post all sorts of wonderful ideas for teaching pronunciation. So I recommend them really highly. What else? Here's a short volume by Mark Hancock from Cambridge University Press, which is called Mark Hancock's 50 Tips for Teaching Pronunciation. So those are some of the things that I would recommend. I think those are the main ones. Maybe also from the TESOL Press, Tamara Jones' book, Pronunciation in the Classroom. Very nice volume.
That's great. I don't know anybody else who has such a pile of pronunciation books right there in front of your lap. Matthew showed his copy of Pronunciation Contrasts, which is somewhat less thumbed, but right there. Michelle, what say you?
I also really use Learner English a lot that Donna mentioned. And I like the book Well Said, and I don't have it with me, unlike Donna. That one has a lot of really fun activities in it. And then just some apps that you can use. I like Vocaroo. Oh, there, Matt's got it.
Yeah.
That's the one I like. I also use an app called Vocaroo. It's free and it's easy. It's a little, you just tell your students to go to vocaroo.com, and then they can make a sound file for you. They can use a QR code, or they can just make a little sound file like an MP3. And then that way you can do like a short assignment, like, oh, practice your color vowel chart and, or say these sentences and send me the sound file, and I'm going to give you feedback on it. So they can be practicing even when they're not in your classroom, and then they can get feedback from you. And another one that I use, and I know Matt uses that too, is just the Google Voice Docs, the little thing on your phone. If the students speak into there and they mispronounce, Google is going to transcribe what it thinks that they said. So that's a really good way for them to get feedback on their own pronunciation, because if your pronunciation is off and you say, bad instead of bed, Google is going to transcribe that for you. And then you get the feedback right away. Oh, my pronunciation is off. Right. So I think that's a great tool.
Yeah, I think Google might be even better for that application than Siri, because Siri is a little bit adaptive and it will learn your accent after you've used it for a while. But Google, I think, would treat you just like any other English speaker and reveal any little contrast that you're not making quite perfectly enough.
Yeah.
That's great.
Can I add to that Google Docs thing? I do like to remind students that it is frustrating, and the speech to text software isn't perfect. And also, if they're if they're stuck between like doc and dog, that minimal pair there, remind them that they should speak in phrases and chunks. That way the Google software will pick up the words better. Instead of duck, 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 doing that the whole time. Have phrases with meaning attached to it. That's all.
Mhm. Yeah, great. Here's another question on the Padlet that has lots of upvotes now. What are some Zoom breakout room practice activities? What activities have you used in synchronous Zoom meetings that have been effective in getting students to practice with one another? Anyone used Zoom breakout rooms?
I suppose one thing you could do is when they're in the breakout rooms, one student will have their own text and they'll read it, and the other students have to transcribe what they believe their classmate is saying. That could work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder what kinds of texts you would use to make that, to raise the challenge level. If you would give them some tongue twisters or some text with a lot of pronunciation contrast built in. This reminds me of the previous question, which is what are some textbooks that everybody recommends? And I want to put in a plug, as Donna did, for a book that is now out of print, but you can still find it on Amazon as a used copy. And the book is called Accurate English, and the author is Rebecca Dower. And it's just this thick book with lots and lots of, thank you, Matthew, you can attest to this. It has lots and lots of sentences with some of those pronunciation contrasts built in to raise the challenge level. And Well Said, which we talked about just a moment ago, does this to a certain extent, but maybe not as thoroughly, as exhaustively as Rebecca Dower, but putting in those sentences where if you don't make that contrast, there's no other way for the listener to correctly transcribe you. So that's a great Zoom room breakout activity to have somebody transcribe what you say. Seth, any ideas to add to that?
Oh, I was just going to strongly recommend some of the things that were brought up at one of our previous meetings, but I think Marsha put that in the chat, because I think there were activities that could be used in breakout rooms, like as you were mentioning, different. I mean, there are textbooks that have one student's working on one page, the other one doesn't see that page, but there's another one with, the activities that complement each other. But I also felt that maybe in breakout rooms we've done peer feedback sometimes, with the caveat that you as the recipient of the feedback are not required to accept every bit of feedback you're receiving. I mean, you may have to use your judgment as a student, in terms of the feedback provided, but it's something that can be taken into consideration.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. Also, Ruth, you've had your hand up. If you can unmute, what's your perspective?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I teach at San Diego Community College District, and I often end up teaching a pronunciation class. And something I do a lot in our breakout rooms is I adapt activities from this book. I know you can't probably see it very clearly, but it's pronunciation practice activities. So there's a ton of helpful things in here. You can basically just look up a topic like consonants or something and then find an activity related to it. And you do have to do some adapting, just making it useful for your Zoom class. So it takes an extra step, but it's so helpful. And then something else I love is this book, Teaching Pronunciation. I got this book when I was a master's student, but it's been one of the most helpful resources throughout my teaching, because inside of it, they have activities for you that they've adapted from other resources. So you can create like a PDF file from it and then just put it on your Canvas shell. So that's what I do a lot. One specific activity I use a ton is called Who's Who. And it's, they have like all these American names like Jen, Jane, Jen, June, Joan, John, and you have to use it in a sentence. And then the other partner has to guess like which name you're saying. So that's something great for vowels. But yeah, I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. A follow-up question. You mentioned a book called Teaching Pronunciation. Who's the author on that book?
Oh, sure. It's a few different authors. I can list them in the chat, but it's Marianne Celsi Murcia with Donna M. Britton and Janet M. Goodwin.
Okay, yeah, and thanks, Donna, for contributing to that book. Donna, who's here at our group today.
Well,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Okay, yeah, Patryk, anything else about Zoom breakout activities?
Yeah, I wanted to feed two birds with one scone, as some people have started saying recently. So there's no killing there. Because there's another question in the Padlet about can versus can't, and I think that most communicative activities from textbooks, such as well said or clear speech or focus on pronunciation, can be adapted into breakout room activities. And for example, focus on pronunciation 1 has a really wonderful one for can versus can't, where the students individually first mark things on the list that they can do and things that they can't do. And then in breakout rooms, they ask each other questions, and then the other student will have to report back what they heard. And in order to do so, the negotiation of meaning and basically asking follow-up questions has to be done, and then students have to really focus on pronouncing these contrasts well.
Oh, that's great. I want to refer to another question on the Padlet, and then as I read the question, I'm going to give my own perspective on this before calling for anybody else. And the question is how and when to interrupt a student effectively and respectfully to address pronunciation issues. So I'll tell my perspective. I do a lot of this in the courses that I teach that are specifically for pronunciation, although I don't do it much or at all in courses that are not specifically about pronunciation. And to do it effectively and respectfully, I always start before a student begins a presentation or whatever they have brought to the meeting by asking the student's own request for what kind of feedback they would like. And my options include, would you like me to just write down and then I'll share what I write with you later? Or would you like me to take some notes and then I'll share my notes with you at the end of your presentation? Or would you like me to interrupt every time I hear you make a significant pronunciation mistake, and then you deal with it in that moment? And very often, I would say most often, students opt for that third option, which is the interruption. But it's more effective because they know what the structure is going to be ahead of time. And it's respectful because they get to participate in, deciding that that's what they want. It's also more in a group setting, it's more effective for everybody across the audience because they also know what to expect and how to interpret that when that happens. And I like that not every student always opts for that option. Some students have shared that they get a little bit anxious during a presentation, and they get more anxious if they're interrupted, or they get just more distracted and they can't really recover from it. And so that gives me a little bit more confidence that I'm making the right choice by offering them various options. And, I also give them a structure about what's going to happen if I make that interruption. Anytime you hear me interrupt, I want you to listen to how I pronounced a word or a phrase, and then try to say it back to me the way that I said it. And sometimes I interrupt to alter their vocabulary or their grammar or their pronunciation. And I might just tell them a little ahead of time, this is a pronunciation tip, and then I tell them what they have to repeat. But if you don't give them that structure ahead of time, an interruption kind of doesn't go really the way you planned. If you just interrupt and say, I'm sorry, did you say catastrophic? Then the student will just nod and say yes, and they'll continue. You don't get that instant pronunciation practice that you wanted if you don't tell them the structure that you have in mind before it really starts. Patryk, with your hand up, do you have anything to add?
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to lower it. No, not now. Thank you, Randy.
Anybody else who's had experience or any other different perspective on how to interrupt and when to interrupt? I didn't really address the when situation or the when part of the question. I just talked about the how. But any other perspectives on interrupting? If not, I will go to another question. Here's a question. I was recently asked to discuss what is meant by effective pronunciation teaching. Does anybody have any thoughts? I like this question because, when we're talking to our colleagues and also when we're talking to our students, we have to be able to explain what we do and why this is a valuable course. It's not always the first course that comes to mind when your director is thinking about what courses to offer next semester, and you might want to really explain what you do. I didn't post this question, but it's also on my mind because I have to put in a funding proposal next week for an oral skills course, and I have to really make my pitch for why this is valuable and it's worth the university's money. Thanks, Marla. So, Donna, what's your perspective on this? How to explain what we mean when we say effective pronunciation teaching?
I don't want to answer that question because it's my question, but
Okay.
I can give a little bit of background on it. I was asked to write one of these long 30-page articles on effective pronunciation teaching for a volume that's coming out, and then I was asked to write a second chapter, also a 30-page, monstrous chapter on the exact same topic. And that's what led me to co-authoring with my Australian colleagues that I mentioned before. And in the feedback that we got for the second chapter, the editors of the volume that we're contributing to made a distinction between effective pronunciation teaching activities and effective pronunciation teaching. And I'm still wrestling with that a little bit. I do believe that there's some literature on what we mean by effective pronunciation teaching, but I don't think that there's a lot of any kind of empirical research on what we mean by an effective pronunciation teaching activity. We all have tons of activities that we use, starting with the tried and true, choral drills and, minimal pair stuff, all the way up to shadowing and mirroring that we've been talking about. But we don't know what makes these effective. We just know that they've always worked and everyone uses them. So that's the background to my question. And I would love to hear people's thoughts on what constitutes either effective pronunciation teaching or effective pronunciation teaching activities.
Yeah, definitely. And even for those of us who are not writing a textbook chapter. We might be writing the syllabus and getting prepared to tell students what they're going to get out of a course, or we might have to be prepared for how we're going to measure effectiveness at the end of a course. Let's see, Marcelo, you had your hand up for a little bit longer. What were you going to add?
Well, it's I think the whole conversation with pronunciation, there's so many factors, like when you're teaching, how to teach pronunciation effectively, you have to, keep in mind that, let's say, let's say in certain non-native speakers, let's say from certain areas in the world, they're simply more, what is the word, volubile. They just talk, period, without even thinking, okay, is my grammar correct or not? You don't have those kind of, alarms or with filters, et cetera. In other cultures, maybe it's like there's more self-conscious, there's a different awareness, right? So in that case, you're like, how do I deal with that, to be effective? You're not going to have the same issues, let's say with, different students coming from different areas. Secondly, students that are, maybe more comfortable speaking, well, their pronunciation maybe is not as good as it would seem, but simply the fact that they're more confident, you kind of gloss over the fact that, okay, there are issues here, and you'll focus, let's say, on a student who might speak in a more choppy way. So I think that it's almost a case by case situation, and we talked about it. It's like really identifying, the challenges that So doing I think doing an assessment test would be the first step, to teaching pronunciation effectively. And you have that, I think, in most programs, the placement test. So that would really help in the sense that you could tailor in a way, which is not necessarily feasible, but I still think that it's easier to teach that way, keeping in mind all these, different factors, because you can't teach pronunciation the same way, or I think it's difficult teaching it the same way to a whole, group of students, different, native languages, struggling with different sounds, stuff like that. I mean, I remember, I was at UCI, I think it was for an interview, and the interviewing team, they were actually mimicking Japanese students to kind of show that, okay, we're not understanding, what you're saying. And instead of like, okay, so basically you're going to have different intonations within the Japanese language. You're going to have different, intonations, let's say an Arab speaker, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it really takes a very holistic approach, I think, and case by case, you can't just kind of, use the same formula. And I think that actually might help students in the sense that you have that cultural sensitivity, to their challenges. So I think that might be a start for an effective way to teach pronunciation.
Yeah, and just that emphasis on student by student, because it's one thing to put together a few course learning outcomes to put on the syllabus, but it's much more motivating for an individual student to know his or her personal weaknesses and start making progress and being able to measure that progress for themselves. Marla, anything very quickly, because we're starting to run out of time.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I just wanted to mention, along with thinking about what is good pronunciation teaching or effective, we also have to think about what isn't effective pronunciation teaching, but what somebody outside the profession might think it is. Like a lot of students come into a class thinking, you're going to fix my pronunciation. I'm going to sound like I'm going to sound like a native speaker. Or other people who maybe are English teachers, but they've never really thought about pronunciation, or they're administrators and know nothing about ESL. They think the purpose of teaching pronunciation is to make these people sound exactly like Americans. And that's not it, and it never will be it. And that's just not, it's not realistic, and it's not, it's kind of pointless. Anyway, that is my.
Yeah, thank you. And as we are running out of time, I want to zoom ahead to one question on the Padlet, which kind of might allow us to wrap this up in a tidy bow. And the question is, does Top IG have a Padlet or blog containing useful pronunciation resources, such as paper resources, online resources, teacher training, such as articles and books? And maybe to answer that, Marsha Chan posted a link to the channel that she keeps where she's archived something like 2,000 videos. Marsha, could you say a little bit of a plug to that channel? Because we have that link in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. It's first of all, it's very hard. I keep coming in and out because in the mountains we don't have that really great transmission. So if I stop talking to you, it's not because I don't want to be with you. I really enjoyed this whole conversation that you guys have been, the discussion period. That's really wonderful. Yeah, so my channel is called Pronunciation Doctor. And there are there's over 2,000 videos, but I've made a lot of different playlists. So if you're interested in pronunciation, there's some pronunciation for students and there's pronunciation for teachers. And they're all the things that we do at TESOL with the top that are in the TESOL playlist. And there's stuff that's more for advanced students. And there's also things about grammar and culture and things like that as well. Other aspects of learning language, oral communication, pronunciation workouts, which I'm a big fan of, trying to get people to understand that doing practice requires learning more about your vocal apparatus and understanding how each part of your vocal apparatus from here all the way up to here contributes to how you project your voice and how you can control whether you're saying yeah, moving your tongue around. So those are different playlists that you might take a look at and see whether there's anything for you. I just started a new playlist that is about reading children's stories. So far I've only published one of them, but I've got some others in the queue.
Hey, Marsha, here's a follow-up question. Does Top IG have a Padlet?
Oh, yes, we do. So we do. Patryk, are you able, I'm on a phone, so it's really hard for me to find stuff. Are you able to find the Padlet for Top? Or somebody else who's got a keyboard will probably find it faster than I can.
Marsha, I'm on a different computer and I don't have it bookmarked. I'm sorry. I think Randy will have to look it up for us.
Sure. And as I do that, I think another answer to this question might be to say that a great way to get these resources from Top IG would be to sign up for the Top IG message board. Patryk, can you say a little bit about how to sign up for the message board? And also, if you're keeping an email list apart from the message board, how can members get signed up for that?
Right, so we do have a mailing list. We sent a newsletter. It's something that we started doing quite recently. I'm going to put a link down in the chat, and let's see. And if you decide to, you don't have to be a TESOL member to sign up for our newsletter, which I think is a great advantage of this way of communicating. But if any of you are interested in getting updates from us about our webinars, events, and all sorts of activities of this group, please click the link in the chat. It's a Google form, and we'll ask you just what type of updates you're interested in receiving, and how many, and just some optional questions about how you've heard about TESOL, how you've heard about our interest group.
That's great. And since we're at time, I'm just going to respectfully acknowledge everybody that posted a question on the Padlet for today. I'm sorry if we didn't get around to your question. We didn't have time for everybody's, but I hope this was useful and informative for everybody. And I wish everybody a great spring of happy teaching.